Well, good morning. We're making our way through our study in the book of Proverbs. And for the last couple weeks, we have been looking at the topic of sin. It has taken us longer to get through sin than what I thought, but that's very appropriate. That's one of sin's hallmarks. It keeps you there a lot longer than you want to be. But we're making our way through the topic of sin, and this morning we're going to finish that up and also hopefully grab the next topic, vengeance. Proverbs has a few specific things to say about vengeance or revenge. So, Proverbs 5:22, that's where we'll begin. We'll review just a couple of verses. We're specifically dealing with the repercussions of sin. If you want to make the choice to abandon what God says, do things your own way, there are repercussions to that. There's repercussions to setting aside what God wants and what God has said and doing things your own way. In Proverbs 5:22, it says, "His own iniquities shall take the wicked himself, and he shall be holden with the cords of his sin." And we looked at this already, but it's the section is talking specifically about adultery, but the principle is generally applied to sin, and sin will capture you. That last part there, to be holden with, it means to be captured, to be taken possession of by force, as in an army that invades a country and takes possession. It's to be restrained, and that's what sin does in our lives. It takes possession. It captures and holds. And then the next one is Proverbs 13:21. Working our way through just a couple of recap verses. It says, "Evil pursueth sinners, but to the righteous good shall be repaid." Proverbs is wonderfully visual, and the picture that is painted here is that misfortune literally chases after a sinner like a wild animal. A person that decides to live in sin, there is literally sin, there's misfortune that is stalking them. So when you want to set aside what God wants and what God says, then you have to understand that misfortune chases after you, stalks you like a wild animal. That is why there is naturally more stress. Because deep in our hearts, in our minds, we know that there's something coming. Even a person who knows very little about God, when they do something wrong, it messes with your confidence. And this is why. This is why. Because evil pursueth after sinners. But on the opposite side of that, but to the righteous good shall be repaid. When you put in the effort to live right, instead of being stalked by evil, by misfortune, you are instead investing in your own future good when you decide to follow what God has said. And then Proverbs 13:22, just the next one. And I believe this is where we left off. We left off at Proverbs 13:21, I believe. So Proverbs 13:22, just the very next verse, he says, "A good man leaveth an inheritance to his children's children, and the wealth of the sinners is laid up for the just." So the positive side of that is a good man, a person who wants to follow God and who is obedient to what God says, he is so blessed that he is not just concerned about day-to-day living, but he is able to help out not only his children, but even beyond that. Because he is not mired with the concern, with the fact that evil is pursuing him and that his conscience is wrecked, because he is living for God, it frees him up to be able to invest in and to look after not just his children, but his children's children, his grandchildren as well. However, as the last part of the verse says, the wealth of the sinner is laid up for the just. Whatever wealth that a sinner can get, it'll eventually find its way to those who live right. A wicked person, a person who is a sinner who doesn't care what God says, is concerned with getting as much as they can. But their main pursuit is going to be useless because all of their effort is going to be empty. In the end, they're going to be left with nothing. And even what they have is destined for, is reserved for those who have made the choice to live for God. So whatever wealth that a sinner can get, it eventually will find its way to those who live right. That is a principle of the world. This is how God has set things up. So it is always a better idea to invest in a life lived in obedience to God than any other kind of life. Because long term, and that's a lot of Proverbs, a lot of the principles in Proverbs are dealing with, if you want to live this kind of life, these are the end results of these two kinds of life. And this is one of them. The wealth of the sinner is laid up for the just. A sinner tries to gather everything that they can, but God just says, just wait. All of your effort, it's going to be useless for you. It's going to mean nothing for you. And in fact, all of the stuff that you want to accumulate, I'm going to reserve that for those who are just, it says. Doesn't mean that it's going to happen in the next year. But God is in control, and this is the main principle. This is a principle of how God has set things up. Then in Proverbs 28 and verse 2, again, if you have questions or if that's not clear or anything, please just pop up your hand and we can deal with that, or you can send us a message, or at some point in time you can ask a question if you would like. Proverbs 28 and verse 2 is the next one. It says, "For the transgression of a land, many are the princes thereof." And we've talked about this verse on more than one occasion before. And basically, when sin abounds in a country, many rival leaders arise. Basically, more conflict is introduced into a city, into a country's government when sin is something that is commonplace. So chaos and conflict in government come when a nation is full of sin. It's not the other way around. It's not, oh, we have great conflict in our leadership and therefore it's having a horrible effect on the country. It's, we are living in sin, therefore the leadership of a country is struggling. There's chaos, there's conflict, even in our government, because of what is going on in the nation. And that's one of the repercussions of sin. The more that sin abounds, the more problems. The larger the waves that come out of that, and the more that it affects. These are not just things that affect individuals. This is a national scale that it's talking about here. This is huge. This is country-swaying stuff. When sin is commonplace, it affects entire nations. It has a huge effect. So if a country's leadership is in chaos and conflict, the problem is not, let us get a new leader. The problem is, we need to deal with sin. That's the issue that's causing that. Bad leadership is a symptom of a sin problem. For the transgression of a land, many are the princes thereof. Then Proverbs 29 and verse 6. It says, "In the transgression of an evil man there is a snare, but the righteous doth sing and rejoice." The sins of a morally corrupt person contain traps that will catch them by surprise. A snare is not just, oh, there's a hole in the ground. It means it is something unexpected that you fall into. It's not just an open pit. Oh, let's walk around that. It's a disguised trap that you can't see, and it catches you by surprise. So when you are living a morally corrupt kind of life, there is a knock-on effect. It will breed more problems for you. So again, these are the two lifestyles that it's talking about. These are big picture things. And if you want to live your life in sin, if you want to live your life in a morally corrupt way, then you have to be prepared. You have to be ready for the unexpected traps that your own sin will cause you. It will catch them by surprise. The sins of a morally corrupt person contain traps. Sin breeds more sin. And that's why, whether it's small or large, none of it should have a part in our lives. Sin is not a platform that you get to and then you have the liberty to walk around and kind of play with things. Sin, you've probably heard it said before, is a slippery slope. And this is the kind of thing that it's talking about. Because you don't just stay in one place. You're on that slope. And the more that you stay there, the more that you're going to slip. Because sin breeds more sin. So when you stay there, there's going to be more things, the more traps that come. It may start out just with one thing. Oh, this is not a big deal. This is just like one area of my life. But eventually it's going to affect another area. And then it's eventually going to affect another area. And then another area. Because sin contains traps. It's not something that can be managed. You can't sequester sin to a closet. That's such a horrendous illustration. There are no sins in the closet. There's just dirt in your life. And it breeds more and more dirt. There's no sin that can be contained in a closet. It may perhaps start there, but it never stays there. In the transgression of an evil man, there is a snare. Sin is a big deal. And the book of Proverbs helps us to understand that. It helps us to put in some boundaries and some protection there. And it also helps us to understand if that's the kind of life you want to live, then you have to understand that there's repercussions to that. This is what it's going to do in your life. Because he wants us to understand, look at where you're headed, because I can tell you what you're going to encounter along the way, and I can also tell you what where you're going to end up. So there should never be a time in your life when you don't know where you're going to end up. You can either invest in your future or be prepared for the consequences of sin. Those are the two things. One of my youth pastors when I was growing up, one of the men that I worked with after that as well, you'd always say there's two choices on the shelf, pleasing God and pleasing self. And that's always the choice that faces you. And Proverbs tells us this is the repercussions for this choice. This is the repercussion for this choice. Make your decision. Understand what that decision is. So sin, it's a big deal. This morning we're going to be in Hebrews and hopefully see yet again that sin is a big deal. Hebrews says much the same. The next topic that I want to tack on to the end of sin is called vengeance. There's just a few verses in Proverbs that specifically deal with vengeance or a desire for revenge, and most of them say the same thing. Most of them focus on the same principle that the book draws home for us. So 3 verses we're going to look at. Proverbs 6:34 is the first of them. Proverbs 6:34. It says, "For jealousy is the rage of a man. Therefore he will not spare in the day of vengeance." Basically, jealousy cannot be satisfied. And when the opportunity for revenge comes around, it can't hold back. So revenge and jealousy are tied together. And if there is jealousy in your life, when the opportunity comes for you to take advantage of someone else to feel like you can pay them back, it's going to burst, and you're not going to be able to control yourself. Jealousy is the rage of a man. Therefore, he will not spare in the day of vengeance. Jealousy can't be satisfied and will not hold back when the opportunity for vengeance comes around. Revenge is fueled, it is often driven by jealousy. That's often where revenge starts. I want what they have. I am bitter that they got what I didn't. They wronged me, and now I feel like everything's out of whack. They deserve something. It is driven much of the time by jealousy. Revenge is often driven by jealousy. Then the next two verses are very similar in how they talk about revenge. In Proverbs 20 and verse 22. Proverbs 20:22, say not thou, I will recompense evil, but wait on the Lord, and he shall save you. The principle, the fact is, it's not your job to take revenge and to make someone pay for their evil. Wait for God to do that. Now, there's a lot of different reasons. And so I want to give you just a couple of my own thoughts. First of all, when dealing with ourselves, we always want mercy. We always want others to show us mercy, to be gracious with us. But oftentimes when it comes to somebody else having harmed me, I want revenge. So first of all, I should not trust that my motivations are so good that I should be justified in taking revenge. And the second thing is, certain things are above your pay grade. Now that phrase is often used by people who are too lazy, so they say, oh, it's above my pay grade. But it applies so perfectly here. It is above your pay grade to deal with revenge. Only God can see the big picture. Only God knows how things are functioning. As with Joseph, he had a plan. He had a perfect plan. So trust God. Revenge is above your pay grade. Let God deal with that. Someone has wronged you. Let God figure out if they deserve something. Because you can trust that he is just. So if they deserve something, they're going to get it. Also, again, you just can't trust your own motivations when it comes to dealing with anger and revenge, because it's so often clouded. So revenge is above your pay grade. It's not your job. Don't do it. Say not, I will recompense evil. Wait on the Lord, and he shall save you. If something needs to be corrected, God will take care of making it right with you. This verse is talking about you. It's not just I'm going to make them pay. It's I will take care of you. So leave the paying back to me. I will make sure I take care of you. And that's at its core the best way to deal with jealousy. To know that I am going to be taken care of, that my needs are going to be met. And God knows that. So he says, look, don't deal with revenge. I will take care of you. Wait for God to deal with that. He can have you covered. And then the next one is Proverbs 24 and verse 29. Very similar in what it says. Say not, I will do so to him as he hath done to me. I will render to that man according to his works. Oh, so often I've heard that pithy little saying that many people use to justify their actions, an eye for an eye. Well, that's horrible life advice. It doesn't work. It's not good. Vengeance belongs to God. Only he can take care of it. Only he can pay back what is necessary. It may be entirely true that that person deserves evil to come onto them. It may be entirely true that they deserve everything that's coming to them. But if somebody has wronged you, let God deal with that. Control your emotions. Now, it doesn't mean that you spare someone from justice. Okay, it's not talking about covering sin. It's talking about revenge. And that's something entirely different. Having justice accomplished is entirely different from, I have been wronged, I need to do equally. I need to make sure that I have my due. They get their due. It's revenge. And if that's something that comes up, it's not the right action. Let God take care of the revenge. Vengeance belongs to God. Only he can take care of it appropriately. Again, it's by withholding your wrath, it doesn't mean that they're not guilty and in need of some kind of punishment. It just means that you have made the decision to let God do the judging instead of becoming the judge and jury yourself. It's not about the action. It's about trusting God to sort it out. And that's how we are able to do it. Because we can trust that he's going to take care of it. So revenge is taking control of evil myself. But God says, trust me, I can deal with it better. Throughout Proverbs, throughout the Bible, the point is trusting God. That's the issue. And that's at the core of revenge. It's taking control myself to satisfy myself. But God says, trust me with it. I am just. I will look after you, and I will make sure that justice is done. It's about trusting in God. Most every topic in Proverbs comes down to that. We don't do it for any other reasons. We are making the choice to trust in God's way of doing things and letting him accomplish things. So revenge, it's above your pay grade. So trust God to get it done. The aim of the book is to help us acquire and apply God's wisdom to the decisions and activities of daily life. Let's take a moment and pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for the opportunity to be able to gather and look through the wisdom that you have provided for us. Pray that you would help us to trust in you, to make the decision to lean not on our own understanding, but on all our ways acknowledge you. So we thank you and we praise you in your name.